Modals are also known as dialog boxes, and they create a mode that disables the main window but keeps it visible. And you really have to interact with a modal before you can return to that parent view that you were already looking at. So this avoids disrupting the flow on the main website or the main app. You have something that requires immediate attention and you throw in a modal or a dialog box, and there's different variations of the modal window. But in general, a modal is typically something that comes into view and then it requires some type of attention before you can continue. There are also non-modal dialog boxes, which we'll cover a little bit later, but I just want to kind of set the stage for what we're dealing with here. Modals can be thought of as quick conversations between the software and the user. It's small, it's contained, but it's kind of like an interruption. It's like, hey, I need to ask you this question real quick, and I need you to tell me the answer before you keep on with what you're going on to do. Sometimes it's highly relevant to what's happening, and other times it might be your battery is low. You want me to go into low power mode, or do you want to dismiss it? And that might not be related to what you're doing, but it is related to using the phone. So there can be different variations of that modal window. So I've got a little sample modal here. I've just got some really low fidelity stuff in the background, like almost like a video management system. And then we've got this modal that has popped up, assuming I've clicked somewhere in this background area to trigger this thing, like I'm trying to delete a video. So let's take a look at the anatomy of this full modal. So number one, I've got this card-shaped background that contrasts with the content and demands attention. So enough contrast. Sometimes this can be lighter than the background to come a little bit further forward. Sometimes there's a shadow. There can be different treatments, but it needs to have that visual contrast so it comes forward in front of the content. Number two, we've got a direct and clear title informing the user of exactly what will happen if they are going to proceed. In this example, the user is deleting a video. So we're asking, delete this video. Number three, this is kind of an optional close button. You might see this more often on websites, more so than you would in a mobile device, but you do have some modals that will have this dismiss button. And so this is like a little close icon in the top right, and it gives the user a way to escape that modal without taking action. This should also be triggered when you hit the escape key or if you click somewhere on the background, and it's going to be really similar to number 6 right here, the cancel button. Okay, moving right along, we've got our fourth section here. This is going to be a direct and clear body of text to provide more context on the action. It's got to be really simple, really succinct, and your words have to be very, very articulate and well written. Deleting this video will permanently remove it from your library. This action cannot be undone. If that's not the case, you could say deleting this video will archive it, and you can undo this action later. That's a much different message and a much different function, even if the design is exactly the same. So you have to be really careful with what you put as your copy inside of this. And the better you can get at writing copy like this for interfaces, the better UI designer you're going to be, because UI design is 90% typography and text. And so get good at typography and get good at writing UI copy. All right, number 5 here, we've got our primary call to action with button copy that clearly answers the question posed in the title of the modal. So we're seeing the title, delete this video, glancing down here, yes, delete. The worst thing you can do is say, canceling this task will result in some unknown consequences. Would you like to cancel? And then there's a cancel button, but then also like a cancel button. And it's like, what am I canceling the modal or am I canceling the task? So that's where the copy comes in, and you have to be really, really clear. And sometimes you might have access to someone who will write this copy for you, but I strongly suggest learn to write copy like this and constantly try your hand at it, try to get better, and try to make it as clear as you can, because this is going to be a really, really big deal when it comes to intricate interfaces and, that copywriting and naming things. That's going to be just really, really important. And the more you do it, the better you're going to get. The better you get at it, the better you'll understand, and you'll be able to communicate better in general. So definitely practice that. All right, number 6, we have our secondary call to action that allows the user for a clear way to cancel this action. So it's very clear. There's no confusing language. Delete this video, yes, delete. or cancel. You could also put no, or you could put no, comma, cancel. There's different things you could do here, but you want to be really clear with what you actually do right for your copy. And then lastly, number 7, we have a transparent overlay that keeps this main content visible, but it's inaccessible during this modal state. So most of the time, if you click the background, click the X, hit cancel, or hit the escape key, then that will go away and you'll kind of reverse out of that action. And this is technically could also be called an alert box, but this is kind of the anatomy of a well-designed modal. It's going to have all of these different attributes. So this example is kind of like an alert modal. So alert modals are going to convey important information about the state of your app or device. And it's going to request feedback, kind of like the low power mode. Do you want to go into low power mode if your phone battery goes below 10%, or do you want to dismiss and not worry about it right now? It's also important to note that if you're on an iOS app and you're designing and you need to request notification preferences, it's kind of a small caveat here, but if you look at the Quibi app, it's a good example of asking for notifications before you really ask for the notifications, because once you trigger a notification request, can I send you notifications? The app actually cannot send another one of those. You have to tell them to go into the settings and turn it on that way. And it's a lot more difficult of a task. So a lot of times apps will design a pre-alert box modal that will be a little bit more custom designed, like the app flavor and less iOS. And it will ask, hey, do you want to turn on notifications? Do you want to allow it now or maybe not now? And if you hit allow, then they'll trigger the notification. That way you have a much higher chance of having the user actually accept it. And if they say not now, you don't trigger it. That way you can call it later because you never actually called that one trigger. So kind of a subtle nuance thing there with iOS permission requests. At least at the time of this recording, you can only ask them one time to allow for kind of a pre-question. Sometimes it's helpful to design a custom one that it preempts that actual main call for that function. There's also an action sheet modal. So if you take a look at this screen recording from Safari on iOS, you can see I'm going to tap and hold this little icon down here in the right. So watch what happens. We've got a small modal that comes up here that is more contextual. So I can tap up here to dismiss this. I can also cancel this, but I can also close all of the tabs. I can close this tab. I can create new tabs. So it's more of a contextual modal based on something that I have triggered with my own action. So that's why it's called an action sheet, because now I've got a sheet of actions that are contextual to what I was already working on. So in this case, just tapping that icon is typically going to go into the view where you can see more tabs. You can create new tabs, you can close them, but this is just kind of a quick way to have quick actions. So it's not quite as in your face as an alert. This is only going to show up when you're actually trying to take action. So whenever you need to tuck multiple actions into a single action, this can be a really helpful way to do it. This is a standard text version. You can also design your own custom action sheets as well. You've probably seen the kind where you tap the bottom and things spin out. Sometimes those aren't that well designed, so just be really careful with the actions that you tuck into other buttons. Sometimes it can be better to have all of them out, but this is an action sheet modal if you need it. We've also got these little popover modals. Check out this cut, copy, paste, or replace. This is kind of like an action sheet, but it's definitely like popping over some type of area. Now this example is selecting text, and you have this little popover to manipulate this text, but there's also other types of popovers that are kind of in the action sheet popover ballpark. It's not highly important that you critically get the name of the exact thing that you're designing. Sometimes it might be more of an action sheet. Sometimes it might be more of a popover. You can kind of use those terms interchangeably, and it's not going to really matter that much. So let's take a look at this one on the Notes app. If I choose this letter A right here, we're going to get a little formatting popover here. So I can still interact with all of the content up here, but I get this popover that I can use as almost like a new mode. It's definitely a modal because it gives me it's almost like edit mode, but it's not quite the same as an alert or an action sheet. It's kind of like a popover modal where you can manipulate something while it's in context with the original layout and content. Here's another example from the Calendar app on the iPad. you can see if you hit this plus icon, you get this little popover modal. So this would be considered a popover, but you could technically, it could technically be an action sheet because you are creating an action, but there's different things you can do in here. So it's definitely, modal is a great name for this because it's a little modal, but it's popping over this little plus sign. A lot of times a popover would have an arrow indicating where it came from. So it talks about action related to that specific area. The same app on a mobile device wouldn't necessarily always have that contextual popover. A lot of times you might need to trigger a full new modal that becomes a new screen in the context of the mobile app. So let's take a look at this one. Whenever we go to the add icon in the top right, instead of triggering that popover with the little arrow, we're going to trigger just an entirely new view that brings in the new event view. So all of that same information is there. It's just in the context of a mobile screen, it doesn't make sense to point an arrow. Sometimes you just have to change the view completely. And that's another form of a modal. So thinking about modals and how you can use information that's tucked into a smaller experience, whether it's sorting and filtering modals or modals where you have different actions or the ability to control the content on the screen. It's a really great concept to think about layering interactions. A lot of times if you're, especially on mobile, you'll get crowded UI and you're trying to put too much information into one area. Sometimes it just needs to be condensed into a full new view. And that way you can tap the filter button and have access to all the filters instead of trying to put them all on one screen. So it's just always helpful to think about, okay, I can put these 5 actions inside of a modal versus trying to show them all at once. So sometimes you can clean up your interfaces, it can enhance the experience. It just depends on the context of your project. The last thing I want to cover here are interstitial screens. Kind of a funny word, but if you think about interstitial, it really just fills a gap, bridges that gap between one flow and another. So if you look at this example, someone has signed up for Slack and it's asking to check the email. So it's not really a part of the sign up flow. It's not really a part of the using the app. It's an interstitial screen that is kind of like a modal that's filling the gap. And most of the time these interstitial screens would exist in this kind of full screen context. Maybe it's a chance to bring in branding. We've got an illustration, we've got the logo, we've got a big purple background. It's one of those screens that can have a little bit more brand design that goes along with it. So for your modal homework, I want you to consider designing up to 3 screens, again, kind of in that fictitious app genre, that ballpark, the thing that you've already been working on. Hopefully you've got a nice little project coming together now. If not, and you just want to do something completely different, that's also fine. But I want you to design either a permission alert, similar to that Quibi example, where you're asking for permission, but it's not the true system permission. It's kind of like that pre-request. It's like, I want to get permission to ask that question that I know I can only ask once. Your second option is to design a custom action sheet or popover, some kind of contextual type of action that might be associated with your app, whether it's maybe you tap post and you get the option of text or image or video, or maybe there's some other type of little popover contextual modal that you can design that it doesn't really necessarily come across as an alert, but it's more of like a helper action sheet kind of thing. Again, you can look at some of the examples and pull some reference for what you might want to design. And then your third option would be designing one of those interstitial screens. Imagine that you've walked someone through signing up for your app, and then you've got, your activity and other designs over here, but right in between, maybe there's the check email screen and there's a chance for more color, more branding, something a little more fun. That's a third option to design for the interstitial kind of mode. So feel free to design all 3 of these or choose the one that you're digging the most. But either way, I look forward to seeing what you come up with, and best of luck.